The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Welcome to another Leon Charney Report. We have a really eclectic and exciting show tonight.
I'm Helit Barel. I'm a former director at the Israeli National Security Council and a former executive director at the Council for Peace and Security, a founding member of Forum Dvora, and writing a dissertation on nuclear deterrence. Forum Dvora is one of the most interesting NGOs in Israel. It's a relatively new one, and it is comprised of former and currently high-ranking former security officials who are females, and not just officials, but women who have worked the national security interest from all the aspects of that issue, which are very broad. And we all came together in order to promote the participation of women in foreign and security policy making, and in order to help implement the very impressive legislation that exists in Israel on this matter. It is our mission to make sure that there are as many women possible who partake in the decision-making process in every aspect of national security, and this includes obviously wide aspects such as economics, environment, and so on. I'm currently writing my dissertation for the University of Maryland. It is on nuclear deterrence and lessons from the Cold War in India and Pakistan for what might happen in the Middle East. I think it's, on the one hand, a very impressive history of 70 years without nuclear use. And when we think of nuclear history since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we say, well, so far so good. But then the question we always have is what happens next? And I think both of those aspects are important to remember. And it's an issue that's so important, we have to stay very cool-headed about it. When we talk about nuclear use in World War II, the context is very important to remember. What President Truman was facing, what the scientists were facing, a very different situation than we've seen ever since, thankfully. Well, the weapons that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we're talking about what they were calling the atomic bomb. And the development that happened next, which was very major, is a thermonuclear weapon, or the hydrogen bomb as we call it today. And obviously its capacity for destruction is much, much greater. And it's a very important issue because it is that destruction that was evident in the early testing that was done that went way beyond the expectation, caused a lot of unexpected phenomena that started to motivate the leaders of both sides to think about non-use, about nuclear weapons, not as a weapon of war, but as a weapon of deterrence. That's not something that was obvious or evident. They had been used not that long beforehand, and they, for a lot of generals, were one more weapon in the arsenals. So starting the notion that nuclear weapons are a different kind and class of weapon, and that they could actually bring about the destruction of the world, had to do with that technological leap into the hydrogen bomb era. Many countries have nuclear reactors, and countries that are members of the NPT, that is the Non-Proliferation Treaty, obviously do it within the confines of this international regimes in a very inspected way and with very particular goals in mind. Of course, it's something that is considered to be a relatively efficient and clean form of energy. So there is a reason why countries would want to have nuclear reactors, also for research purposes and whatnot. And for as long as they actually conduct this within the confines of this international regime, we generally tend to think of it as something that is acceptable. But as you know, in the Iranian case, there have been very many issues with compliance with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and a lot of back and forth with the IAEA, that is the International Atomic Energy Agency. And so what we're seeing here is a problem for this international regime where if a country can, like Iran or North Korea, under the guise of being a legitimate member of this regime, develop a non-civilian program, a program which is intended to create nuclear weapons, then we have a problem with the whole constellation of nuclear power for civilian purposes as well. When the Americans had basically a nuclear monopoly after the end of the Second World War, they did not expect the Soviets to get the bomb so quickly. And they were even more surprised, I think, that the Soviets mastered the hydrogen bomb, thermonuclear ability so quickly as they did. So obviously it's different in different places, and it's hard to gauge. In the Iranian case, I think we know enough about their fissile material to know that what they have in a stockpile is enough to create a bomb. The question is not only as far as the fissile material, the question of course is about the weaponization. What work goes on in the weapons group, which is the group that needs to actually create the device. It's not as simple as you might think. People say, oh, it's out on the internet and so on and so forth. Yes, but you still need a lot of engineers and you need a lot of skill. And so, but we here in Israel certainly believe, and I think in the United States as well, that they had mastered that. Probably did not take the decision to build the bomb, but had mastered the process. And in those terms, Iran, I think, in every aspect, is a nuclear threshold state, and it has been even before the interim agreement was signed in 2013. I think this deal has some advantages and has some very clear disadvantages. I think it is a deal that is ultimately an acceptable alternative under the current circumstances. I would not tag it a good deal, and I would not tag it a catastrophe. I mean, why not to reverse completely the Iranian nuclear program? I mean, that was, and by the way, that's not such a far-fetched idea because it was an idea promoted in at least 4 UN Security Council resolutions, this idea of no enrichment in Iran until it comes clean completely about what happened in answer to the IAEA and so on and so forth. That was also the rationale that the sanctions were imposed under. So the notion that Iran should have no nuclear weapon capability is a very good one. And if we could have no enrichment in Iran as Israelis, we would be very happy. I just don't think that was attainable in ways other than in ways of negotiation. So in other words, negotiating wise, I don't think that was an attainable deal. Let's address the issue of the motivations for a nuclear bomb. I think we have to be very realistic about Iran's motives for a nuclear bomb, and it's important to place them because that's why we have to always keep an eye on Iran and not be under the misguided notion that this deal somehow has put to rest Iranian nuclear ambitions in terms of weapons, because it has not, obviously. And the reason for that is because Iran, as I'm sure you know, during the Iran-Iraq War, suffered many casualties. It was also under a chemical attack on its civilians by Saddam Hussein, and there wasn't really much reaction in the world, and I think that is one of the key experiences that led at the time of Sanjani to go to Khomeini and say, we need a weapon that will prevent this from ever happening again. Also, Iran views itself as somewhat of a different factor in the area. Obviously, it's not Arab, it's Persian, its majority is Shiite, and so on. So it is, in a certain way, a pariah state. So its perception of itself is very much as surrounded by not necessarily friendly elements. It had a very immediate threat from Saddam Hussein and Iraq for very many years. So there are real national security reasons why they would, in their minds, seek this power. And it's important to remember that because that's the reason I don't think they will stop seeking this power. If it was just something that they're doing for national credibility and so on and so forth, then you might be able to dissuade them, force them into reversal, things that have happened before in different countries. Certainly they're going to be inspected, and certainly they're going to be inspected, and certainly there are mechanisms that the international community can take and should take and keep taking to try and prevent them from actualizing those ambitions that they have. And I think if we keep at it, then we might achieve the result, which is not letting them cross the nuclear threshold. So that's very important. But as far as where they want to go on a national interest level, I think they're going to keep aiming it. I don't think they made the calculus before this agreement that they should abandon the nuclear weapon aspiration whatsoever. I think they decided at this time this is a wise choice, because of the state of their economics, of the state of things in the Middle East. There are a lot of factors going into it. The regime itself has its concern about its own sustainability within a context of what is called an Arab Spring. And so it's a very pragmatic way for them to say, okay, well, we're losing time, they're buying time, but we're also not abandoning our long-term goal. I think that's clear. Nuclear weapons know no boundaries. The effects of the nuclear device, an explosion of a nuclear device, won't stop at the border with Lebanon, with Syria, with Jordan. I mean, the effects of this, even in a very limited context, would be catastrophic for the region. So it's not just a question of what would happen to Israel. If we are hypothetically speaking of a hypothetical exchange and addressing what it would look like, it would be you would have to assume more than one bomb, and you would have to assume great damage to the entire region. So I think it's clear that that's not something that is in the interest of any of regional states, but we don't have to guess that. We see the very, very strong reactions of Saudi Arabia and many other nations to this Iranian program. They are maybe not publicly as explicit as the Prime Minister of Israel is, but behind the scenes, they are very much more concerned, I think, even than Israel, as to what that means, how Iran is going to conduct itself now, and so on. I have been saying for a long time that there is a correlation of interest between Israel and the Gulf states on many issues that are going on in the region. This is not the nuclear issue alone. So there is very much basis, if it's interest-based, there's very much something that we can base it on. Having said that, we can't forget that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is an open conflict, and it is one that very much prevents moderate Arab states to go ahead and move into any kind of closer relationship with Israel on other issues, because there's an open sore there. So the balance of interest here is very intricate, and they're on the same side just by virtue of interest. That doesn't mean they cooperate. First of all, according to the NPT, there are nuclear weapon states who are acknowledged as nuclear weapon states, but they don't include such states as India and Pakistan. So the question of nuclear states is a question of also of formalities and international institutions, but also of realities. In reality, India and Pakistan do have nuclear weapons. As of North Korea, it has declared itself to have a nuclear weapon and so on. There are questions about North Korea's ability to actually pair them with launching devices and so on, means of delivery. So it's not as clear as the Indian issue, for example, but it's very important to note that there are nuclear weapon states outside of the NPT, which makes the NPT, again, a little bit anachronistic, a little bit detached from the nuclear reality. It's also important with this regard to note that the attempts to get nuclear weapons, the non-compliance with the NPT, a lot of these cases have been in the Middle East. So you have Iran, you have Syria, you have Libya. So it seems like for the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, the Middle East is a particular problem, and perhaps it requires a particular solution that's not been met within this universalistic system of the NPT. I can't enrich uranium, and you can't enrich uranium. So again, it's important to understand that this is a process that takes mastering. It takes resources, it takes advanced science, but obviously it's not impossible. We've seen Iran enrich uranium and reach a nice stockpile of uranium as far as they're concerned. So it's not impossible to do, but it does require a national effort that not every country will take on. You have to be very dedicated to it, and particularly when you do it like Iran did in a clandestine way. How long does it take to create a nuclear weapon is a question that varies from country to country. When we're talking about the Iranian case, We know that they've already mastered the main obstacle, which is accumulating the fissile material, the uranium. So as far as that concerns, they have the stockpiles that are required. We've been watching them delve into this nuclear program since the 1990s, so we know that it's been going on for over 2 decades. And specifically in the Iranian case, it seems like we need to assume that they have mastered all those difficulties and they have jumped over all those obstacles by now. And now it's a question of decision. So in that sense, Iran is very much a threshold state. There are different estimates of how long it would take for Iran to actually build a nuclear device if it's so decided, outside the context of this agreement. And those range between a few months to 18 months or so from the moment of decision. So that is the case with the time span for Iran. Can Israel or the United States or a combined force use military power, bomb, and erase the Iranian nuclear program the way it has been done in Iraq and Iraq, and the way it's claimed to have been done in Syria is an important question in the context of this agreement. I think there's a big difference between what Israel could do on its own, obviously, and what the United States, with its great capabilities, could do. But the estimates on what can be done vary. And if we're talking about, for the Israeli context, what has been talked about is pretty much obtaining a delay of more or less 2 years, 24 months. And that, of course, is speculative because these are not, nobody is really versed in the operational realities of this issue. Then that's the time span that could be achieved. A greater time span of delay could be achieved to an attack that hypothetically the United States would be involved in. So, and both countries have said that they are not taking the military option off the table. They do not necessarily prefer it, but they've also not abandoned it in case of non-compliance, for the United States in case of non-compliance with the agreement and so on, and that has been very clearly stated. Is Israel committed to the deal between the P5+1 and Iran? Clearly not. Not only has the Prime Minister stated this very clearly, but it's important to remember Israel had not taken any part in this negotiations, was not in the room, was not even in any kind of observer status or advisory status, so there really is no reason why officially Israel should be committed to the terms of this deal. And I think the Prime Minister has made it very clear from day one that the military option is on the table. I don't think he's changed his mind on that. The question of whether any of this will actually be implemented or will happen is very different, of course, and it has to do with political realities and with the national interests of Israel and how well they will be served by any particular course of action taken. Can we use cyber technology in terms of helping us prevent or delay an Iranian deal from coming into fruition? Well, I think from what we know, according to different sources and publications, of course this has never been confirmed, it seems that there has been cyber warfare that has been used and quite successfully against the Iranian nuclear program. Again, as I had mentioned before, a nuclear program building of actually the device and actually being able to pair it with means of delivery is not as easy as you would think when you read on the internet. So a lot of computers are involved, and that makes it susceptible for these kind of technologies. I think since we've seen them used before, we can expect that they will be used again, and certainly that's something to look out for. The issue of inspection in this deal is actually a very important issue. It's probably one of the strongest sticking points between the United States and Israel, and I think rightfully so. The concern with the issue of inspection is there is a separation between inspections of the nuclear facilities, and let me qualify that, the declared nuclear facilities, and the military facilities. So the declared nuclear facilities do have 24/7, anytime, anywhere inspections, which is a huge deal. It's not something that's been done before in any country. It requires a lot of effort from the IAEA, and it will allow, I think, to really be able to see what happens within the declared nuclear facility. The question, of course, raised by Israel is what happens if there are undeclared nuclear facilities? How do we go about finding them? How do we go about finding things that are related to the nuclear effort, such as weaponization, the weapon group, that don't necessarily happen within the nuclear facilities, the declared nuclear facilities? And here's where we reach a problem. What is stated in the agreement is that if inspectors want to, they have a suspicion of something going on, they want to check it out in a military facility, in a military site, they basically have to, they can't just go in, they have to request permission to go in there. And Iran can try to prevent them from going in there by coming back with an answer saying, well, there's no need, or trying to clarify or not. It then goes to a committee. This whole process is said to take 24 days. In real life, when this comes down, coming down to implementation, it will probably take a little longer than 24 days. But even if we assume 24 days, it seems to be a long time to be able to try and cover up things and move them around and so on and so forth. Now, to be fair, if there's fissile material there, 24 days is not enough time for these traces to evaporate. But other efforts that are related to the nuclear effort might go undetected, and that is one sticking point regarding the inspections. Can Israel develop or obtain some sort of defensive capability that would help it protect against the launching of a nuclear weapon? Is a very important question. It's been a key effort of the Israeli security establishment to create a multi-layered defense system. We've seen the Iron Dome as it regards to conventional, very rudimentary weapons. We've seen that it has had a great effect on preventing casualties and direct hits. But the nuclear issue is a little bit different. Yes, Israel, with the help of the United States, as we've seen publications everywhere, has been working for a long time on a system of missile defense, one that is probably more effective than others that we've seen in other places in the world that are called theater defense. However, there's something that we have to think about in terms of a nuclear launch, which is you can't have one come through. And that is, from a defensive point of view, a very difficult equation. I'd like to make the point that the nuclear issue is really began, we talked earlier about the Manhattan Project, began as a scientific effort. And science is a very civilian realm. It is not really a military realm. And I'll go further and tell you that this whole science or social science that is developed with regards to deterrence, it's really an issue of game theory and an issue of strategy. So it's a very cerebral kind of issue, which is very much open to women just as much as it is to men. You don't have to have been a general to be able to master these issues and make an impact in them. As a matter of fact, the civilian perspective here is very, very important. It's a scientific effort, it's a strategic effort, and of course the military part of it is crucial as always, but it has to work together with others, which opens it very much, I think, to female involvement. And I think personally, I know here in Israel some very, very impressive women who are working on these issues from within the government, also from academia and whatnot. We have a terrific ambassador at Vienna, ambassador to the IAEA, who is a female. She's doing an amazing job, probably in the hardest time that Israel has faced in that institution. So I think we're seeing an opening, and I hope many women will follow and understand that this is an important and also exciting realm that is open to women, and you just have to want to do it. The Dvorah Forum, as I think you know, is a very exciting new forum here in the NGO field in Israel, which put as its mission, and has stated, the promotion of women in national security and foreign policy making as its goal. And it is very important for us to make sure that women do participate at every level, in politics, in the defense establishment, in academia, and any other place, in circles where decisions are being made about national security interests. And I will make sure we mean that in the broadest sense. We include in that environment, we include in that cyber, we include in that economics. And we have a very wide range of experts who are female, who have made contributions and continue to make contributions in all of those fields. We want to make sure that those voices are being heard, that they participate, and we want to make sure just as much as younger generations see this and take note of this and understand that this field is open to women, and that they should really branch out of anything that is considered a traditional female realm or whatnot. Understand that all realms are female and male, and that they can certainly come and participate, and especially in a country of Israel where so much is determined in these circles about the strongest national interests that we hold, and us being 50% or more of the population, it's time to take part. The question of the role of women in Europe, for example, is a very interesting one. In the United States, again, we've seen great movement in the issue of women in positions that they take as politicians, which is another very important realm. The ability to run, to get elected, and to run a country or run a city and so on. We've seen in other countries much greater strides than we have seen in Israel. And we very much hope that we can bring about the change that will bring Israeli women to at least the same positions, and especially because we have very advanced legislation in Israel about these issues. And we informed Vora believe that we can help in implementing that legislation and making sure that these ideals become real. Is this an agreement that is a good agreement? Is it a bad agreement? It is something in between. I think the voices that we're hearing on either side claiming this a great success or a catastrophic failure are both errant in this issue. We are dealing in international politics. We have to be extremely pragmatic. We are dealing with an issue that's been intractable, that's been on the table for a very long time, that came very close to a very crucial point. Before the interim agreement of 2013, we heard statements here in Israel that Iran is weeks away from being able to create a nuclear weapon. So stopping that clock was certainly crucially important. The ability to do it in a diplomatic way means that there's negotiations that go on, and you're going to give some things and get some things and so on. What are the negotiations, the most efficient they could have been and so on? Who is to say? I say this because we in Israel see ourselves problems with negotiating agreements that we have here and whatnot. So obviously, the notion that through a diplomatic negotiation we could have gotten the complete reversal of the Iranian program, I think is errant. I think it was never really on the table. But having said that, there are things that should have gotten more attention. There are things that should have gotten more pressure. One example that we give here in Israel is the question of lifting the embargo on weapons after 5 years and the embargo for missile-related technology in 8 years. Those are things that, one, have a weak linkage to the nuclear issue. So it is unclear, since this is not a comprehensive agreement, what they're doing in this agreement. Obviously, they have to do with pressure from China and Russia. So this is one place where pressure played in, and who knows if it could have gotten out. You could have gotten a different result staying in powers. But altogether, this agreement does have the advantage of putting time on the clock and of allowing us to prolong this issue of the Iranian crossing of the threshold, the nuclear threshold, not having to deal with it immediately. Now, to the extent that anybody thinks that this is a peace agreement, or that now we can employ trust with regard to Iran or see any positive change in the region from Iran, that is completely misguided. And it is even possible that things will get worse because of its certain legitimacy that it has now acquired through this agreement with regards to the nuclear issue. And that's something that's very important to note as well. So I don't think it is in any way a great success. A great success would be a complete reversal of the nuclear deal. But neither is it Munich, and I think that's very important to understand. And I think what's most important for Israel to do now is to get back into the room with the United States, with the P5+1 in general, to make sure that the very important and crucial input that Israel has on these issues regarding implementation of this agreement. You have to understand the important phase is now the implementation. So anything that Israel can do, and I believe it can do, to enhance its own security through participating in this process and making sure that its inputs are there and that it is getting an account of what is going on is very important. Is Prime Minister Netanyahu's attitude conducive to promoting and moving ahead the Israeli role now in the phase of implementation? No, it probably is not, because, but we have to understand, Prime Minister Netanyahu is still fighting this agreement. He's very much going to try, as he stated, to stop it. Just the same as President Obama said he's going to go all the way in moving it through. So we're seeing very opposing points of view, which is very sad for the pragmatic elements in both places, because what we need to see now is work, real policy work. We need to sit down, we need to bring to bear our capabilities and our ability to make sure that everything is meticulous and that anything that moves to the right or to the left by an inch is noticed, is reported, is acted upon immediately. There's no reason to assume that will happen automatically just because there's an agreement. But that's not going to happen if both sides stick to declarations that are somewhat, I would say, detached from the reality of the agreement. There is not a leader in the region that doesn't understand the realities of nuclear use. I would like to believe that. I think the Israeli formula that we've been hearing, that this agreement is somehow equates nuclear use by Iran in 10 or 15 or 5 years, is something that leaders in the region don't necessarily buy into. Some do, absolutely. Some have the same formula on their mind. But I don't think we need to be particularly surprised that the Palestinians are taking a position that, first of all, is diametrically opposed to the position that is taken by the government of Israel, but also a position that is taken by a lot of other countries in the world. So I don't think there's anything unique about it. Well, whether the public in the United States is for or against the deal, I think we're going to find out in the next weeks with the unfolding struggle that we're seeing in Congress. My sense is that the American public is first and foremost tired of engagement in the Middle East to a certain extent. And to the extent that that is true, that's a much more comfortable environment for the agreement to be popular. But I don't think for a minute that the American public sees Iran as a peaceful nation. I don't think the American people don't understand the Israeli concerns. Very much to the opposite. I think the American people are very in line with that, understanding that Iran is a problem, but perhaps also understanding that the solution at this time is an acceptable one to them, to the American public. It seems to me to be that there's a difference between what the professionals and the security establishments on both sides feel about the deal and what is being said. Obviously, they can't talk about it themselves because there's politics going on, and we have civilians at the head of these systems, as we should. I think my sense is on both sides, they want to get working. They want to do the work. They want to turn this into a tool, something to work with. If this deal is signed, let's work with it, I think would be the sense. We worked very hard, even way back then at the early 2000s, on the prevention of an Iranian nuclear capability, a nuclear weapon. We did a lot of work vis-a-vis the US and many other nations, and really worked quite tirelessly on the different channels. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, we might not be able to stop them. And that's when I decided to go and look at what will happen if we're not able to stop them. I think Camp David is probably the greatest achievement that we've had. I think it is the reason that Israel has managed to flourish and become a very strong nation and really make the leaps and bounds that it has, become such a modern nation and take such a role in the region. I think without taking Egypt out of the war, none of this would have happened. And I say that as someone who grew up going to Sinai for vacations and loved it and lamented it when it was given away, but it was worth the price.
No, I'm saying I don't want to go into possible solutions or possible resolutions of the political issue, right? We know there are various possibilities. It's not clear right now what the road ahead leaves, what kind of options will be available. But I'm just saying precisely those who want to, who believe that Israel should permanently control at least parts of Judea and Samaria, they have to be able to prove that it can happen in a somewhat peaceful way. If there'll be constant violence between Jews and Arabs in those territories, then it's very hard to make a case that this should be the permanent solution. So again, I don't want to go into specific arrangements. Our president now just recently spoke about how he sees a kind of one-state solution. There are, of course, people who still believe that it's necessary to divide the historic land of Israel and to create two states. But however we do it, certainly the settlers should be the first to try to lower the level of violence, okay? Because, again, only these small radical groups, that they think that by engaging in violence, they can deter the Arabs and create Jewish control. I doubt if that will prove itself out. I think it'll be very dangerous if that continues. Well, I think that religion in general is a very powerful force, and it can be used in positive ways and it can be used in negative ways. And people who have belief in religious truth and believe that they have knowledge of religious truth, and they're willing to devote themselves, so they're willing to commit their lives, they're willing to risk their lives for the truth they believe in. So this can be very it can be very positive, it can be very negative. The Talmud already says that the Torah, if you merit it, it becomes an elixir, it becomes a potion of life, and if not, it becomes a poison. In other words, that the power of religion, right, as opposed to the relativism and the openness and the pluralism of some of Western society. You'd like it like this, you could have it like this, you could have it like this. Religion, or at least certain types of religion, believe in a specific truth, believe in specific values, and these people can find their interpretation of religion to be one that can lead them to violence. We see this in all the religions. And Judaism isn't exempt from this pathology, okay? And Judaism also has a problem that we haven't had a Jewish state to experiment or to learn from experience, right? The state of Israel, many religious Jews see the state of Israel as an experiment, as a way of seeing, can Judaism, which was a culture and a religion and a tradition that for many, many years lived in the diaspora, right, without political control, how can Judaism create a state, right, that will express Judaism, but in a positive way? That's one of the challenges of the state of Israel for many religious Jews. So there is a pathology, and one has to be able to deal with that pathology. It's not of throwing out it's not that the Jewish religion itself is dangerous. Any religion can have that kind of dangers, and committed Jews and it has to be done within the religious community, because people from the outside, they can't influence what the religious emotions and the religious interpretations, but from within the community, the educators, the rabbis, the community leaders, they have to make sure that this power of religion is not used in a negative way. When we talk about questions of religion and state in Israel, so when I spoke about the religious Zionist, I said that part of society, the issue that is the most crucial is the interface between the political issue, the question of the territories, and religion, and how that will resolve itself, okay? When we talk about the ultra-Orthodox community, so I said that the ultra-Orthodox community is not that ideologically invested in the question of the territories. But the ultra-Orthodox community, for them, it will not be a crisis if there's withdrawal from the territories. Their problem is, of course, those ultra-Orthodox who live beyond the Green Line will have to be compensated. But they don't have an existential crisis. Withdrawal from the territories won't be seen by them as an attack on them, on their community. Their issue, the issue in which they challenge Israeli society, is different. Their birth rate is extremely high, unusually high in any group in the developed world, right? Israel as a whole has higher birth rates than most of Western society. In other words, Israeli non-Orthodox Israelis have over 2 children per family, average over 2 children per family, which is higher than in most Western developed countries. But religious and ultra-Orthodox have much higher birth rates. When we talk about ultra-Orthodox, we're talking about an average of 8 or 9 or 7 or 8 or 9. We're talking about very large families, and this is a major issue of concern in Israel. This is an issue of concern not on the political dimension, but because of the economic impact of this rate of growth. The ultra-Orthodox community as a whole, has much lower numbers of participation in the workforce. Many of them don't work, and they join the workforce at a much later age. They tend to work in lower paying jobs because often they have not been trained in those basic things that one needs in order to get a job in the modern economy. And because of this combination of these factors, both the natural growth and the fact the limitations of their education and their lifestyle, so if we take all these factors together, then there's no doubt that Israel is facing a major challenge. The larger numbers, and there are various statistical projections of what will happen in the future, but there's no doubt that a larger and larger number of Israelis will belong to the Haredi community, and therefore it is of major importance for more and more Haredim to join the workforce and to be able to join the workforce in jobs that are productive for Israeli society, that will able to support them in a proper way, and will enable them as a community to contribute to Israeli society in all its levels. Unfortunately, political pressures do not allow the Israeli government to take clear policy measures about this. There are things that are being done. There is an awareness that there has to be a lot more vocational training for Haredim to allow them to enter the workforce, but not enough is being done. Especially the most crucial issue is the lack of core curriculum education in the Haredi school system. The Haredi school system is totally autonomous. It sets its own curriculum. It refuses to accept any curriculum imposed by the government, even though they are funded almost fully by the Israeli government, right? Nevertheless, it's paradoxical. The government has very little say in imposing curriculum. So therefore, especially regarding men, Haredi men from, let's say, the age of 13 and up are not exposed to any secular studies. They don't study English, they don't study mathematics, and it's very difficult. Experience has shown that it's very difficult to train people when they're 22, 23. Sometimes they already have a family, to start teaching them then the basic skills necessary, let's say, to learn how to program a computer, or first of all, to learn a computer, to learn the English alphabet, right? So these things are a major challenge, and I hope that there will be enough foresight in Israel to, even if it takes a confrontation with the Haredi community, to find a way to create a revolution within that society. Regarding the question, and some people are very concerned about it, the conflict between religious obligations and the obligations to the state or to the army. So first of all, again, let's put this in context. First of all, every state believes in freedom of religion. And therefore, part of freedom of religion is not to impose or not to coerce people to do things against their religious beliefs, right? That's part of the belief of any liberal state. So in general, Israel has not put religious people into a situation where they have to participate in actions that are against their religious beliefs. And in the IDF, for instance, there is a very complex list of rules which allow religious soldiers to participate fully in the army, to fulfill their security obligations, their obligations to the state, and to also fulfill their religious obligations. Not only that, of course, the IDF does things that imposes things on all soldiers in order that religious soldiers can serve fully in the army. For instance, right, all the food in the IDF is kosher, right? Even when there's units of Druze soldiers, right, they are if they have to keep kosher food, and if they do things that are against the laws of kosher food, then they can be court-martialed, right? The laws of the Israeli army require that all the kitchens in the IDF have to be kosher, right? And similarly, regarding Shabbat, of course, Shabbat is much more complicated, but in general, in the IDF, there's no training on Shabbat. The only actions that are commanded for a soldier to do are either actions that are not prohibited on Shabbat for whatever reason, or security-related activities, things that are necessary for the security of the state. And of course, that, according to religious law, is permitted. And not only permitted, it's obligatory to do on Shabbat. So again, until now, in the IDF, religious soldiers in general were not put in a situation where they had a conflict between their religious convictions and their obligation to the army. Okay? Of course, there are always exceptions, but those were the basic situation. Now, what I mentioned before, of course, makes things much more complicated. In other words, once religious authorities claim that any withdrawal from territories or any evacuation of a settlement is against religious law, that's putting a soldier in a conflict, and a really very, very difficult conflict. Okay? So the truth is that I would say, in other words, I think that any, just like armies in the world recognize conscientious objection. If you have a problem with your conscience, right, then it's a problem. Others, armies recognize such a thing. Now, the problem, again, in this hypothetical scenario of evacuation of settlements is that this would create a situation where perhaps the IDF could not fulfill its own orders. In other words, this would be a total disintegration of the army and of Israeli society, right? So therefore, many of the rabbis that I know, they say in such a case it would be obligatory to fulfill such an order because the alternative would be total anarchy. Okay? So when push comes to shove, it's hard to tell, but we saw already in the disengagement 10 years ago, there were very few cases of soldiers refusing to obey authority. It was done in a very sensitive way. The IDF was also considerate, and the rabbis were. Everyone took a step back in order to avoid a confrontation. So when dealing with such issues, usually the best way of dealing with it is to find a pragmatic situation and not to force people, put people up against the wall. That's what I think.